Welcome to Lynn's Country Kitchen. Today on the menu is pasties, except technically we'll have it tomorrow because the first phase of making pasties is to make the crust, which we'll make today, and then it needs to sit in their fridge overnight. So it'll technically be on the menu for tomorrow, but for today, let's make that crust. All right, so we've got 2 cups of water. I'll put this in here. And we have 4 sticks of butter. We're going to be melting this in the microwave. And then we'll be letting it cool. Alrighty, the butter has melted. Now, of course, microwave ovens vary, but for mine, it took about 3.5 minutes to get the butter completely melted. I gave it a little stir, checked on it at about the minute mark each time. And so, yeah, about 3.5 minutes is when I stopped it. And there were a few little butter chunklets in here, which I just stirred and they melted up really nicely. So at this point, we just let this cool before we add the other ingredients. Okay, this has been cooling for about 15 minutes. So we are ready to add the other pasty ingredients, or the pasty crust ingredients. So they are flour, baking powder, and salt. Here we have 6 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and just a sprinkle of salt. So let's add those in, stir it up, and while we're doing this, this gives me a chance to tell you the history of the pasty. Just kidding, I'm not. Not only because you probably don't care, but because I don't know it. But I can tell you pasties are very popular in the UP, and that is where I'm from. And that is where this recipe is from. I did not invent this. A sister of mine passed it along. She got it from the mother-in-law of another one of my sisters, and she just loved it so much, and I loved it when I was there, and I thought, I have to have it. I have to have that recipe. There are several places up in Upper Michigan where you can buy pasties at pasty shops, but once I tried this, I never went back. It's really good. Another thing I'll mention about this that maybe you're thinking is, that's a lot of butter. Well, that's right, but the butter helps with the flavor. It helps make the crust nice and flaky. So tomorrow we will be making the filling, and so another point you may be wondering about is how many pasties will this make? So this will make about 13 pasties. Tomorrow I'll talk a little bit more about that, but for the time being, we've got our crust made. As I said, it'll sit in the fridge overnight. I'll cover it up with this handy cover, and we'll work some more on it tomorrow. I don't want to over mix this here. I'm just basically trying to make sure the ingredients are combined, but otherwise I just want to not over mix and just let that sit. See you tomorrow. Okay, it is the next day, and we have all of our filling ingredients ready to go for our pasties. We have 2 pounds of browned and drained ground beef, so that's all set to go here. We have mushroom soup here. This is a can and a half. We have potatoes. The recipe calls for 7. I only had 6, so that's fine. So they are obviously peeled and diced, ready to go. And here we have some carrots that I have already diced, and I used the long ones. A lot of people like onions in their pasties, and that's totally fine. I don't, so I'm going to use a little bit of onion powder. That's good for me, and salt and pepper to taste. So let's get all of this together. And I'm putting this in a big roasting pan just because it makes kind of a big filling, and I just want to be sure that there's room for everything. Adding the potatoes here and carrots. Adding the mushroom soup. Of course, it goes without saying you can be flexible here on the ingredients. There are some people who like rutabaga in their pasties. That's super popular. So that's obviously an option for you. But these work for me. This is what I like to have. Just a sprinkling of onion powder here, a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. And I don't really measure those. I guess if I had to guess, I would maybe say about 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt and maybe 1/8 of pepper. But, again, with the seasonings, just be flexible, okay? You can add the things that some things that you don't see here, or not add these, just whatever you feel is right. The mushroom soup helps to kind of pull everything together and make it creamy so that it's ready to go into the crust, which we will do next. That's our next step. Also, during this time, speaking of the crust, you can pull that out of the fridge to just sort of get it a little bit more pliable for preparing the pasties. Maybe 20 minutes out of the fridge, something like that ought to do the trick. Okay, we have our dough. We have our filling ready to go. And here is just a little bit of flour in case we want to sprinkle that down before we roll our dough out a little bit so that it doesn't stick, hopefully. Okay, all right. So I mentioned that this will make about 13 pasties. So at this point, we'll just separate this out into 13 pieces, and then we'll start to roll. Okay, I have the dough all separated into 13 little dough balls. So let's put some pasties together. Just gonna sprinkle a little bit of flour, don't need much. And these don't have to be futzed with too much. In fact, you could even do this by hand if you want to. It's totally fine. Just push it out if that's the case, with your hands if you'd like. But basically, you're just making some room on here for the pasties. For the filling, I mean. You know what I mean. All right. So we have this in kind of, sort of a circle, but not really. And if you feel like measuring it out, maybe you could say about 1/2 cup of your filling on half of it. But otherwise, don't be picky. It really doesn't matter too much. There are no hard and fast rules here. But so I just put it on half of the pasty, and then I'm just going to flip that over and then just make sure that it's sealed. If you've made pies before, then you know that you can get fancy with the edges if you want to. You can flute them or whatever you'd like to do. For these purposes, I'm not going to futz with it too much. The main thing is that it's sealed. But yeah, if you want to pinch it, maybe I'll just pinch it a little bit to make sure it holds its shape. Okay, and then just lift that up and put it on the pan that you intend to cook it on. Now here I have a baking sheet with parchment paper on it. They have a lot of butter in them, so they might not need parchment, but I am just going to do that to be on the safe side. So you can cook them up like that. Or I have also been known to cook pasties on my baking stone. So I always like this for baking as well. So I will put those together, and shortly I will preheat the oven to 350 degrees. They will cook for about an hour. All right, the pasties are assembled and they are ready to go into a 350-degree oven for about an hour. Of course, check it a little early if you want to be on the safe side. You want to take them out when they are a nice crispy brown, and you'll see that in just a little bit. All right, it's been an hour. Actually, one of these took about 55 minutes. So do check these a little bit earlier just in case. But some on the baking sheet, some on the stone. They are ready to go. Enjoy.